today. Alrighty. I want to make sure the recording has begun. Yes, it has. Fantastic. So, hi, everybody. Kerry Brown. Welcome to the Transformation Forum with Celonis. I'm thrilled to have you here. And exactly as we were just sharing before the recording, we do capture this so that folks who can't join in can hear it later on, because it is great to learn and hear real stories from people who are navigating through system transformation and leveraging Celonis to do it as smartly as possible. So today we have another chapter in the story with Kam and Jasper sharing, as you can see on the screen, how they worked through some migration considerations around hypercare at Calor Gas. And Apolix was the partner who helped them with that. So we have them joining us today. And we're going to begin by letting them introduce themselves and share some of the background on that. Quick background on myself for anyone who hasn't met me. I'm a transformation evangelist at Celonis. But more relevant to the conversation today, I was at SAP for 18 years and a customer of SAP's for 12 years prior. So I've lived in this space for a long, long time and really enjoy the ability to share some stories on this conversation. So with that, Kam, if you'd like to introduce yourself first before we get started, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Good morning and good afternoon, colleagues, depending on where you are. My name is Kam Gakhal. I'm Head of Process Excellence here at Calor. Leading up a team of process leads and business process analysts, also responsible for data governance and master data management. That's roughly me. I've been with Calor over 25 years, so I've been through a number of sort of systems upgrades. We adopted SAP last year, but I'll talk a little bit about that later. I'll just hand over to Jasper to introduce himself.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Jasper van Hattem. I'm engagement manager at Apolix. So I'll introduce Apolix in a second, but my role is more towards the sales and strategy in the UK and the Benelux region. So also that's how I came in touch with Kam more than a year ago when we started the first project. And it's been a successful partnership ever since. So also quite excited to spend the next hour to talk more about that. So that's me.
Fantastic. Thank you. For everyone today, just a couple of housekeeping rules. Would love it if you've got any questions, put them in the chat. Certainly, if you've got a question midstream, we'll do our best to answer that mid-conversation where it's timely and topical. But so put that in the chat and I will manage against that. Today, what we're going to do format-wise is Jasper and Kam are going to share a little bit of background on the program itself. And then we're going to have some more interview-style conversation today. And so by all means, do drop in your questions in the chat so we can include that in the conversation. With that, Jasper, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, as I said, very excited to spend the next hour talking about the journey that Calor Gas, Apolix, and Celonis have been through in the past, let's say roughly 1.5 years. I think for today, we'll spend some time on first introducing Calor Gas a bit further. That's what Kam will take care of. Also, I'll introduce Apolix and our role in this project. And then from then onwards, we'll be spending a lot of time on Kam explaining the transformation journey. I think it was a quite interesting journey. Spoiler alert. So Kam has a lot to tell about that. But also what I have is a demo on the dashboards for hypercare specifically that we have been building, that we built for Calor Gas and they've been using ever since. So also be very excited to share with you how that looked like, what we did there, what the philosophy behind that was as well. And indeed, as Kerry said, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat and happy to answer them. But I think first things first, Kam, over to you.
Sure. So for those of you on the call who haven't heard of Calor, Calor is a major brand within the UK, supplying liquefied petroleum gas. We're an 89-year-old company who've been around since 1935. Currently today, I'm speaking from Warwick in the UK, which is based in the centre of England. And we operate fundamentally in the energy and utilities business. We're the leading supplier of liquefied petroleum gas in the UK, and we have over 1 million customers across the country. We don't serve them all directly. We have a relationship with the dealer network and retailers who fulfill the demands to some of our end customers, and we're committed to reducing carbon emissions. We are investing in bio-LPG and renewable energy solutions. terms of the core business, it is fundamentally distribution of that gas. And that comes through, we have bulk tanks in many rural and commercial settings. We have industrial gas supply, so that's in the agricultural, leisure, forklift, hospitality, auto gas type industries. And we also provide LPG for homes in more residential homes in terms of heating, cooking, hot water, etc. In terms of the key products, as I just mentioned, liquefied petroleum gas in the form of cylinders, predominantly butane and propane. And for those of you who have barbecues, some of you may be familiar with our patio gas cylinders. And then we have bulk LPG tanks. And again, as I mentioned earlier, these service predominantly domestic customers, but we do also have commercial customers in this space. And we are also pushing ahead with renewable energy solutions, specifically in the bio LPG space. That's a little bit about Calor. Over to you, Jasper.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. So also a little bit about Apolix, because some of you might have heard of Apolix, some of you might not. Basically, we're a platinum part of Celonis, and all we do is like the end-to-end journey that comes to improving your processes. So our only and main tool in the toolbox for process improvement is Celonis, is process mining. And actually, yeah, our full team is dedicated to only doing these types of projects where we first start with a technical implementation and then also really go towards improving processes, finding these opportunities. Quite fast growing team as well. Actually, in September, we have 15 more people starting to in the end be over 50 FTE. So it's for us, it's an exciting journey, and Calor Gas has been a big part of that. So yeah, in a nutshell, that is Apolix, but I think we're mostly here today to talk about yeah, the Calor Gas migration journey. So yeah, Kam, back to you.
Sure, no problem. So before we dive into the detail, I thought it'd be good to sort of understand sort of systems and exposure and experience we've had in this space. We were JD Edwards users from 1996 to 2023. In that time, we went through 4 major upgrades. It was an on-premise AS400 type solution. It was heavily customized. And we've got roughly 2,000 users, so a reasonable user base. And then in sort of June 2019, we embarked on a global project with our sister companies. We're part of a global SHV energy group of companies. And so this program has been 4 years in the making. We adopted a global template, taking all the core modules, sales order processing, purchase order processing, general ledgers, work orders, scheduling, the Reba suite, using Vim, and there's a few other ancillary products that we've got bolted on into our space. We went live May the 10th last year, so we've been live for an extended period of time now, but it was some journey. If you think about, we've been using JD Edwards for close to 27 years. It was our know-how, our understanding of that system was well understood. So moving to a new system and the new ways of working and adopting those new ways of working was some challenge. We ended our hypercare in December. We had the scale of change was, as I just outlined, very significant. And we had technical and process challenges to contend with during that time. I'm pleased to say, we're in a much better position now. As the rollout of Celonis has certainly helped in this case. And we are, Feb 24, we've extended the use of Celonis towards other modules. So originally we focused on 3 areas. I'll talk about them a little bit later. But we are now also looking in at the accounts receivable space, specifically around debt management. We're also extending it to things like GRNI, goods received not invoiced. So seeing how we can leverage the information that's available to us. The one area where this tool has really come to the fore is giving us information easily and rapidly at speed that's reliable and up to date. In terms of the journey, in terms of the hypercare, this has been a real evolutionary journey. There's been, learnings on both sides. We went live, as I mentioned earlier, May, and we engaged with Apolix and Celonis a few months earlier than that. And at that point, we really didn't know what we didn't know. So it was, that's why I've sort of used the words, it was a journey of evolution. We had regular check-ins with the Apolix team to discuss what were our hot topics. Where did we need the tool to help us focus our areas? And then, over the, since May last year, it's been a journey of continuous development and improvements. We've been making tweaks to our reports, developing new reports, making changes to how the visuals of those reports, in some cases embedding a VAG status, making it more visual and consumable for our end users. Initially, the report and tool was consumed by the project team. We have recently decided to expand it to the end users to help them self-serve and understand where we've got challenges and where we need them to do things differently. So, this can also be a end user tool. And we have extended the scope. It's fair to say the reports and dashboards and metrics that we're now looking at are different to the ones we were looking at last May. That's because we're now more familiar with the tool. We're now more familiar with our SAP system, and we're also more familiar with where we have those process bottlenecks. And the Celonis tool has enabled us and helped us in that space to get better insights and drive better visibility, and also drive action within the organization to move us forwards.
Kam, if I can ask you, the roles on the process team, what were the roles that that you began with on the process team, and how did you introduce them to the tool to give them visibility, understanding as a consumer of that kind of information? How did you enable them?
Yep.
And then also, as you looked at end users, same question, sort of which kinds of end users and what capabilities were you trying to bring to them?
Yeah, sure. No worries. So initially, the focus in my team was predominantly on the business process leads. Some people refer to them as business process owners. And they had been involved in the project in the prior years to us going live. So were familiar with what the design looked like, albeit we hadn't really tested the system in anger. It was, in a limited scope. So they had a number of sessions with the Apolix and Celonis teams to understand what type of reporting would be required. We zoned in on 3 areas, and I'll cover them in the next slides in terms of the approach we took, what type of metrics we looked at. But it is fair to say that because the business process owners and business process leads were new to the process mining concept, we probably weren't as familiar with the tool at that point in time, and also what we really needed at that point in time. And I think what we discovered into the journey was our visibility, our understanding, our comprehension of the tool and our systems and the process challenges emerged as we embarked on this journey. And then in terms of how did we engage with the end users, we identified pockets of the business where there were specific challenges, and rather than having the process team point out where things weren't quite working as they should be, or where process paths weren't being followed, we set up a program to sort of build a number of key users. I think there was 8 in total, dotted across different parts of the business, and trained them to self-serve and understand what the tool is telling them, and then for them to liaise with the end user to sort of explain what we should be doing, and also making them aware of what the issue was with them in not doing what they should be doing, if that makes sense.
Fantastic. No, thank you.
Kam, anything on this slide still, or should we continue to the next one?
If you could move to the next one, please.
Yeah. maybe any questions from the audience before we continue?
Feel free to take yourself off mute or put it in the chat.
Hi there, it's Christopher Deans. So, quick question: why did you not use the starter kits and use that to kind of start your journey rather than trying to kind of continue to build?
So the starter kits, if I'm quite honest with you, it was something we weren't sort of overly familiar with. There were people within the project team who had some exposure to Celonis previously on previous projects. So I think they'd had some good successes with the tool. So our decision was to continue with the Celonis toolkit and work with that. So we really never really explored the starter kit, as it were.
Yeah, so to add to that, the starter kits basically, first of all, this happened more than a year ago. So, for example, the transformation starter kits or whatever the exact name for this didn't exist yet. And during the conversations that we had with the business before actually building the insights, we really figured out that first of all, the insights that they needed were very like more high over. I'll show it in a second, but more around, for example, user adoption, master data, for example, as well. Which is of course something that is not part of the starter kit. So we basically decided to build our own transformation hub for that with a level 1, which is a high over migration analysis, and then level 2, more in-depth into particular use cases. And some of these use cases do have an overlap with the starter kit. We just didn't use that as our foundation.
Interesting. Okay.
I'll show it to you in a second. Okay, maybe on that note, what happened? So what did we do? I think Kam can confirm that. Yeah, of course, maybe more people in this meeting can also confirm that migrations, especially go lives, are stressful and sometimes a bit chaotic as well. So also, yeah, from our end, we had it was some sort of pressure cooker. As you can see right here, we spent only 4 weeks on actually building all the different control towers for the different streams that we were working in. Ken will talk more about that in a second. We in the end did 3 processes, and our vision really was like, on 3 different levels that we should get insights. So first of all, starting with general migration analysis. Which users are performing which activities, how much activities are being performed, which transactions are being executed in your SAP system. Do we see outliers? Do we see unexpected figures, for example? Just continuous monitoring of these figures to see if we will, if you see anything weird that we should act upon. That was number 1. And second of all, really from a management point of view within the domains that we worked in. So for example, within order to cash, what were the risks that were identified by the business before going live? And one of the risks was, for example, incorrect migration of master data. So what we did, we built a master data tracking dashboard, for example, where we could flag potential items where the address was the address was only containing a country name, for example, or some contracts had like certain criteria where we could identify, hey, these are invalid, wrongly migrated contracts, so we should flag them. So that was what you saw on the management dashboard. And then we could go into a third level, which is a deep dive into these particular use cases. Think about master data, think about unbilled orders, for example, where you could see, hey, which individual orders, which contextual information around it for the business also to be able to act right away. And what we actually saw was that right after go live, the complexity of the process already was quite there. As you can see on the left, this is the spaghetti diagram 30 days after the migration. So really going from that spaghetti to like understanding where exactly things are going wrong, also with the pressure that is being put on the process owners, on the business, and the also limited time available from everyone because there's a lot of things to do, of course. It was quite an interesting exercise, but I think it was also a very successful exercise, which I will show in a second. But maybe before we show that, Kam, could you maybe go into the different processes where we did this exercise on?
Yeah, sure. So I'm just going to outline the sort of 3 areas we chose to zoom in on. But just to re-emphasize Jasper's comment around, how were we using the tool? Process adherence continues to be a real challenge for us. And this tool allows us to sort of see where those variations are, identify training needs if there need to be. And we developed work instructions off the back of some of the insights that we've gleaned from here. So in terms of user adoption, master data management also is a really, really key area. If you think about it, we've had a JD Edwards system that was been used for 27 years. The JD Edwards journey into SAP was painful. I can say that having had the scars, and the tool helped us to identify sort of any sort of groups of data where there were anomalies. I'd like to say in this space, not so much of an issue, but again, the tool did give us insights. So the three areas that we've zoned in on: order to cash, purchase to pay, procure to pay, and sort of install to main on the plant maintenance side. On the order to cash side, we've processed over 2 million lines of sales orders since we've been live. How have we been using the tool? What sort of insights has it been giving us? Jasper showed on the previous slide, a huge spaghetti diagram that you can zoom in and out, and you can see where the bottlenecks are. And the sorts of areas we've been zoning in on is, deliveries made where perhaps the invoicing cycle hadn't yet kicked in, orders that had been blocked that weren't being progressed for invoicing. On the finance side, how long is it taking us to invoice those customers where the delivery has been made and you have got a PGI movement? Any master data anomalies? Now, what did this mean for us in terms of a business sense? It really did help identify where we had bottlenecks, and in some cases, bottlenecks that we didn't really know about. So, by proactively identifying, those billing blocks that weren't necessarily visible to us, the SAP ways of working and some of these billing blocks we tested in hundreds or thousands of transactions. We were live all of a sudden, and it was tens of thousands of transactions. So the tool was able to sort of allow us to sort of address these sorts of issues quickly. On the procure purchase to pay side of things, looking at the volume of orders, we raise roughly 75,000 purchase orders a year. We have around about 90,000 invoices from our suppliers. We've got 2,500 suppliers that we work with, and getting transparency around that process, and also getting the most out of Vim. We have enabled it or set it up so that touchless processing the system is capable of doing that. So if you raise your purchase order, you plug in your purchase order receipt, the invoice comes in, and if everything matches, it will go through the system touchlessly. What this tool allows us to do is sort of see where that isn't happening, why those invoices aren't being processed within Vim. Have we done that? There are reports that are in there that are being sent to the AP team leader, the AP process owner, the heads of department, to sort of see where those bottlenecks are occurring. And we're embarking on a program with the business to sort of, again, I'll re-emphasize that point around process adherence. The tool really does give us better visibility in that space and gives us leverage and allows us to focus in on the areas that we need to zone in on. Moving over to the install to maintain plant maintenance stream, we had a legacy system called PMAC, which was a standalone install to maintain plant maintenance system. We had to migrate all of that information into SAP. But fundamentally, this is a maintenance program which tells you which work orders need to be completed when, whether or not they're overdue, what the maintenance cycles are, but it also sort of captures costing information. And again, the change here was different. Our colleagues were used to using a PMAC system, moving over across to SAP. We had an integrated system which integrated with purchase orders that needed to be generated, captured all costing, etc. But the tool allowed us to sort of flag any of these high priority work orders which weren't being addressed. Through that, we were able to share metrics with the business and get them to focus in on the areas where these work orders needed their attention. So there's just an example of sort of 3 of the areas where we've zoned in on. Again, accounts receivable is another area we're working with Apolix and Celonis in developing metrics specifically around debt management. And on the purchase to pay side, we're also enhancing the reports to sort of look a little bit more at GRNI, looking at which users do we have outstanding unmatched GRNA values, what's the age of those GRNI items, does it have a stock impact? And again, with a view to sort of maintaining a clean and clear data set. I think those were the sort of 3 sort of areas that I wanted to zone in on. If anyone's got any questions, please feel free.
I do. I'll just jump in, and everyone feel free also take yourself off mute if you've got a question, or stick it in the chat. When you shared the ability to look at process adherence more directly, I'm curious, when the business looked back at that, what were the actions that they took other than just look more closely? Did it involve more training, the change team? How did they look at those KPIs and dashboards? How did that, knowing that there was a problem, how did you then use that process adherence opportunity to make a difference in terms of improved performance?
Yeah, no, it's a really great question. And yes, we engaged with our change management team. We set up specifically a change management team, recognizing the scale of challenge that was on the horizon, and they worked with the training team to re-educate, re-emphasize, and make clear what the revised ways of working were. But also, I think you mentioned that how did these metrics we are adopting. We've labeled it up internally as a tiered metrics process. So these metrics are being measured on a weekly or monthly basis, depending on which teams the colleagues are in. And they are actually being cascaded down. So they are reported upon regularly, and tangible actions are being followed up in terms of colleagues doing things differently. If the system isn't working, we in some cases, we look at how the system is configured. Or if training needs to be re-emphasized, we will push out our trainers to the local team to support them in those areas. But a combination of change, training, re-emphasizing, this need for process adherence. I cannot re-emphasize, the scale of change that we've had to adapt. So it's been some journey. We're not 100% there now, but we continue to leverage the tool. We continue to push for process adherence, and the Celonis and the metrics and the information we're getting from there is certainly providing insightful information and useful information, which we're working with the business. As I mentioned earlier, we've actually now deployed some of these reports and metrics out to end users for them to sort of self-serve.
Yeah, maybe to add on to that, a good example of that is what we saw, and I'll show it in a demo in a second, is that there were a lot of blocked orders that were not being billed to the customers. There was a lot of ship not invoice, as it's also called, and there's of course an app from Celonis for as well. So also what we did deploy that app for Calor Gas as well, and now some end users have been using that app literally on a day-to-day basis to accelerate the billing of open orders based on findings that came from this whole setup that we'll show in a second.
There was a question. Go ahead, please.
Oh no, sorry, Kerry, carry on.
No, please go ahead.
I was gonna say my next question is, and it may be towards the end of like what's next, right? So if I think about like this year's fast running out, what does 2025 look like as part of your evolution and journey?
Yeah, so no real focus on how we look more at those process pain points and prevent them from happening, establishing what those root causes are, working with the change management team, working with our AMS providers to understand, are there any tweaks we can make within the software to prevent some of these issues from reoccurring, but also continuing to work with Apolix and Celonis in terms of developing these metrics in other areas, as I mentioned, AR for one. We also use work orders in the customer, in what we refer our customer engineering area. So we're looking at how we can expand the tool set into those other areas. The key prime focus for now has been sales orders and that order to cash process. The order process, we zoned in on, lots of different areas, and billing being one of them. And the procure to pay, we're getting stronger in that. We're extending that to GRNA. And on the install to maintain, it's just sort of expanding that into a different business stream, but also exploring whether or not this could be sort of expanded out to more end users so that they could self-serve and be sort of sufficient in terms of understanding how well that process is working. On the master data management, there's work to be done here in terms of 2025. There are insights that the tool has given us that need to be actioned. So I think the master data management insights are also useful, but we haven't quite leveraged them. So I think that, for 2025, that will certainly be another area of focus for us. But also sharing that knowledge, we have got other sister companies who are looking at this tool set, working with them to sort of help develop their knowledge, but also share our experiences with them.
Couple of questions in the chat. A general question. Normally during the S4 Go Live, the client team, Calor Gas, is quite busy in dealing with all kinds of issues with SAP and may deprioritize using other tools like Celonis. So curious, both, I guess, Kam, to you as well as to Apolix, how did you show at that time that Celonis was time well spent and energy well spent and valuable for Calor Gas on the S4 Go Live? That's probably a question for both of you. And Patrick, I see your hand up. I'll come back to you in a second.
Mm.
You want to go first, Kam?
Yeah, sure. I think if I'm being totally honest and transparent, our use and sort of eyes on the Celonis tool for the first month or so was limited because we were in that firefighting hypercare mode, and there was so much going on at that point in time. It was a big bang implementation. So on May the 10th last year, we switched off JD Edwards, a week or so before, and May the 10th we switched on SAP. So you can imagine where the focus was. But over time, and I think I mentioned that earlier on in terms of the business process leads, but also Calor being new to process mining, we've understood our processes much more intimately through use of the tool, and the business process leads have been involved also with more regular contact with the Apolix team. We were having fortnightly check-ins with these guys to sort of understand what insights is the tool really showing us, and they were helping us understand where our bottlenecks were, but also how we could use that information to sort of drive our business and out of the hypercare area. Fortnight is, yes, every 2 weeks.
Yeah. So to add to that, I think it's a very correct question. Because especially the BPOs had a lot of things on their head, on their mind, and it was, I think, a big expectation, too big of an expectation to, let's say, in the period right after go live, have them use Celonis on a day-to-day basis or on a week-to-week basis, even because there are a lot of things to do. So I think momentum was from in terms of adoption was building up a bit slow, which is understandable, but that's also why we as an Apolix took the opportunity to be very prescriptive, because, for example, with the finance team, we then would just ourselves signing into Celonis, we'd see a lot of blocked orders with a really particular block. We'd make an Excel export out of that, send it via email, and be like, hey, is this something that is relevant to you? And I think 9 out of 10 times was actually something that they weren't aware of. So that's also really where us as an external party could push a bit more, where the BPOs didn't have yet the headspace to do it themselves. I think now that is completely turned around, where now Calor Gas is using Celonis in the dashboards themselves, and we more support with adding new features, adding new insights, etc., etc.
Thank you. Patrick, I'd love to hear your question, and Devjit will go to you next.
Perfect. Yeah, I know one of Celonis's biggest use cases is a pre-migration tool for ECC to S4HANA. So I'm just wondering what the benefits and challenges were of using Celonis, post-migration, because usually we hear pre-migration. So I guess for Kam, if it was a deliberate decision to leverage Celonis post-migration, or if just didn't have awareness of Celonis before that. And then I guess for Jasper, if you have experience with a pre-migration, how it was different. I know it might be slightly different here as well because it's JD Edwards to S4HANA rather than ECC to S4HANA, but just curious about those aspects.
Yeah. Yeah, we went from JD Edwards to S4HANA rather than the ECC path. In the interests of honesty, I think the data migration, as I alluded to earlier, and the master data sort of challenges was probably one of the areas we least leveraged the tool for. That's not to say that there isn't value in there. We have been looking at some of the insights that the tool has given us specifically around the business partners and any issues that the setup of business partners could have with billing, for example. The Celonis reports are telling us certain fields that need to be corrected and addressed, and that's certainly an area we're going to be focusing on a little bit more in terms of 2025. From terms of data migration, we engaged with a partner company and partner consultants who were very familiar with JD Edwards and S4, and our pre-migration, post-migration checks were predominantly done outside of the Celonis tool set.
Fantastic. Devjit, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, would be great.
Sure. Thank you very much. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Kam and the colleague for the explanation. My question is based upon what Patrick has just asked, and I think it's a two-part question, which is, based on what you've just suggested, that the pre-migration checks were done outside of Celonis, and now that you're in post-migration and you have had experience, based on your experience, where do you think that you would potentially or could use Celonis pre-migration, to identify the data jobs and the transactions moving on from JDE to SAP, because there are thousands of transactions that need to be migrated and mapped. So I was curious to know, because that is one of the core kind of user cases that we also have, which is to identify what are the data jobs and which need to be moved. So I'd keep it at that level.
Mm-hmm. And then I think that's again another good question. And I think if we had embarked on our journey earlier, I think this tool, in terms of pre-migration and post-migration, would have had a bigger role to play. The reality is that our data team didn't exploit or leverage the tool to its full extent because we committed to sort of doing it in a different way. But I do think that with hindsight and maybe if we'd engaged with Celonis and Apolix earlier, the tool would have had a role to play, certainly in pre-migration as well as post-migration. We'll be looking at it from post-migration now in terms of, because it does give you master data management insights, but we missed that opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah, also to add to that, and it will also immediately tie into Elena's question in the chat, which is, I think my understanding, and it's also what Kam just said, was that Celonis wasn't in the picture before. It was just something that came in the picture quite last minute, and the back then CTIO decided this is something we actually need, and we need it yesterday. So when the project started, it was in April 2023, and the go live was in May 2023. So everything you'll see in the demo that I'll kick off in a second was built within 3 weeks or 3 to 4 weeks. And we did that ×3 for all 3 domains, including all the workshops from the business, including the validation, the iterations. So it was a 3 FTE from our side, a full-time going very bananas for 3 weeks, I would say.
Fantastic. 3 weeks. Wonderful. And I was thinking probably that's the best way to do that, because you're in the SAP implementation project, you change the design of the system, the architecture of the system all the time until the last moment, right?
Yep.
So it may be impossible to implement any dashboard, to design any dashboards, build them before the final stage. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's useful to know.
No
Jasper,
problem.
I'll ask one more question, and maybe you can answer it as you do the next demo, is how has the feedback been from the new end users of Celonis, and what could be improved? And perhaps as you share those dashboards, since I know that's who you've been sharing it with, either if you want to answer before that, Kam or Jasper,
Yep.
but also want to make sure you get time to share as well.
I'll actually start sharing the demo, and then
Fantastic.
if I forget to answer your question, just remind me.
I will do.
But I have
Perfect.
definitely some things to say around that. But I do think also looking at the time, it would be really valuable to share some minutes in the demo. Basically, as I said, we built 3 levels of granularity for each of the 3 domains. So what I have right here, this is not Calor Gas the data. That is something I want to be upfront about. This is the dashboards that we basically copied from their environment, filled with a dummy data set, but also fitting with the timeline that they have. So it's no company secrets, but the similar storyline. And what we have right here is the level 1 migration analysis, which is really high over, not even that process specific process analysis actually for the migration analysis, where you could see the complexity of the process. We can see how many variants, how many activities, how many sales order lines, but also per week, for example, which activities took place most often. And we can see right here is the week of the 8th had actually a lot of creations of particular orders. You can see 99,000 create sales order items, as for example, when the data migration took place, and then afterwards the process started running. And we can see right here is, for example, under user adoption, we can immediately also see how active users were and how many users we had active in the system. So what you see right here, we have 176 users, immediately growing to 276 users later on. So we could track user adoption, but also the behavior of individual users. Because what we could see as well, we could, for example, spot which users are performing automatic transactions, which are doing manual transactions, and what is the reason they're doing that. And maybe something, Kam, feel free to fill me in a second as well. There was from the partner that supported the migration, they had particular users that were doing firefighting. So they're firefighting users, basically, and consultants just firefighting. Maybe Kam, you have some examples of what they worked on?
Yeah. So we had firefighter IDs for our AMS partners to sort of hand crank some of those troublesome transactions where users had made errors or there were technical issues. And for the interests of security, we went through this firefighter ID sort of control to sort of limit who had access and how they had access to that. So Jasper sort of given some really good insight here in terms of how you can trace at almost user level, and you can then also see where those deviations occur at user level, and that's the sort of space we're in right now. Very early on, we weren't this granular.
Yeah, and what we were then, for example, seeing is if I take this particular user, let's say this is this has been a firefighting user. I can filter on this particular user, and I can see which exact activities this user has been performing. And actually, I prepared the data set in such that this was actually representing a situation that we saw at Calor Gas, where we saw a firefighting user. The majority of the tasks that this user was doing was removing and setting billing blocks, which is quite interesting because these were all manual interventions. And right here, you can actually see 60,000 plus manual interventions, which is for us immediately a cue based on the general migration analysis to think what is happening here, what are we seeing here, have the right conversation with the business, but also to dive right into the data. So stick with that for 1 second. I'll get back to that later. And what we also could see was that if I go right here, is that the last activities that were taking place in these types of processes, especially right after migration, is also something very interesting, because if you look from a process perspective, what the last activity was that was performed on a sales order, you can immediately identify places where the process is stuck. So why after the release of a sales order is nothing happening? Why is that the case? So also here, these were quite good conversation starters, because we could find quite interesting insights from what is the last activity. And it was part of our, say, migration control tower. Then thinking about these unbilled orders, but also what I said, the second level of granularity, where we have a more management overview of what we see. So based on the conversation with the business, we identified 4 pillars that were most important for the business process owner of order to cash to keep track of. There was deliveries, blocked orders, master data, for example, contracts with wrong addresses, what we talked about, but also finance, mostly in the area of unbilled orders. And thinking about unbilled orders, quite interesting to start thinking about, like, why do we see unbilled orders in the first place? Where we could see, for example, over time, that's why we were logging in every day, was this number, the actually unbilled order value was going up and up and up. So that raised, of course, the question, why is this number going up? And what we then could do immediately, together with the business process owner, we could dive into this particular example, and we could actually identify the, let's say, long runners, for example, so that has been like overdue for quite a while, and we can actually figure out that the orders were blocked for quite some days. And actually now it's been quite a long time, of course, since 2023, but we could see that a lot of these orders were actually blocked and therefore not being billed. So we could also immediately go into the billing blocks of blocked orders overview. We could identify the particular order that was being blocked, but also the type of block that was on it. So we could find, for example, billing blocks that again were active. And remember also the firefighting user that was actively removing those billing blocks manually. So yeah, then we got into a really particular example, the DSD blocks. Kam, maybe you can highlight a little bit what's happening there.
Yeah. So just want to re-emphasize, this is all sort of test dummy data. But in terms of what the tool allowed us to do was identify, not just anecdotally, we knew that billing block was an issue for us invoicing customers, but it actually gave us the detail behind the billing blocks. We quickly uncovered that within the billing block there was a specific type of billing block that we weren't even aware of, which resulted in a significant number of transactions from being invoiced and billed. And again, it was a process adherence activity that fundamentally caused this billing block. Orders weren't being reconciled. We built in another control within our system, which required users to count the number of cylinders that were being brought back into the business following a delivery. And if there was any anomaly between what was being brought back in versus what the system thought should be brought back in, a specific type of billing block was being applied. And we are talking tens of thousands of lines here, but the tool allowed us to identify this specific issue. We were able to get that information from within the system at drill down granular level, order level, without the need to get consultants or partners to write reports for us. We could get the information from within the Celonis tool, export it into Excel, and get it actioned. And that was the sort of difference we were able to make with this. And fundamentally, that has an impact in terms of customers' belief in your billing, but also your debt management and your timeliness of the invoicing process, but also making users aware of the importance of this activity. So the tool helped in lots of different ways in terms of bringing about process adherence.
Are there any questions around what we just showed?
I'm betting there are. So I'm looking for the hands and the questions in the chat. This was really a thorough showing, but please, by all means, do take yourself off mute or raise your hand or put it in the chat.
Sorry, Kam, Jasper, got another question there again from Celonis. With regards to the transactions, I appreciate the process and ongoing improvement, but have you mapped all the transactions from JD into the SAP system now? And have you redesigned them using Celonis, any of the current transactions? Because there is a huge difference between JD and SAP. So have you redesigned using Celonis any of those efficiencies by reducing the number of transactions?
Yeah, so Debjit, in terms of what we carried across from JD Edwards into SAP, it was fundamentally only open in-flight transactions. We then had an extended sort of blackout and cutover period in the lead up to go live, and those transactions were keyed in manually. In terms of where we're getting that value from the Celonis tool set is more around the transactions as they are flowing through the system. We didn't really have any significant issue around the migration and the integrity between what went from JD Edwards into SAP. As Jasper sort of highlighted, it was more around how that transaction then flows through the process. And what the tool allowed us to do was to identify, areas that we didn't even know we had a problem, if I'm honest with you. So, we were using that billing block as an example. There was this DSD billing block, which, we weren't even aware was an issue until sometime down the journey. So, we're still learning, but to everyone on the call, the process adherence piece is key. The tool gives you the mechanism to be able to identify where process adherence isn't being followed, and it gives you the facts to be able to try and tackle then those challenges.
Kam, Jasper, thank you once again for sharing your experience. Extremely valuable. Thank you.
No worries.
Elena, I see you have a question. Feel free to take yourself off mute and ask.
Thank you. Did you try to assess the efficiency of the processes prior to migration and after the migration? I mean, did you try to benchmark what you had in the previous system and in SAP after implementation, or it's too early to run that analysis?
Now, that's a really great question, Alina. And I think in some cases where the process is variation was not significant, we have benchmarked. So I'll give you a couple of examples. In the purchase order space, we looked at late receipting pre-SAP and post-SAP, retrospective ordering, so where people are raising purchase orders post the invoice landing. Again, we're looking at those measures prior to when we went live and since we've been live. As part of our change management, we were also mindful that we came from an environment where our system was heavily customized. And we've tried to adopt a more off-the-shelf solution now. So, how we've been working is, using that tool now to sort of, develop that sort of discipline. But the short answer to your question is where the process variation and the processes were similar pre-SAP, we are using the tools to compare pre and post. But in some cases, the processes are significantly different and it's difficult to make that measure.
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you, Elena. A question in the chat from Laurent. Did you essentially replicate, you've answered a little bit of this, but did you essentially replicate the existing processes that existed in JD Edwards into SAP? And only after that look at optimizing? What was your approach?
No is the short answer. This is a transformation project. So, we looked at roles, responsibilities, ways of working, worked with our integration partner in terms of looking for the optimal solution. So our order to cash process is quite significantly different. Our procurement process is very different. We didn't have the concept of requisitioning before. We've now adopted requisitioning. One of the measures we look at now is how long does it take us to convert a requisition into a purchase order? So that's a sort of measure we wouldn't have even looked at in the past, but we've now got the ability to do that. So there were subtle changes in virtually all areas of the system. And we did not look to replicate what we had in JD Edwards in SAP. I don't think SAP would have been capable of doing, and that was one of the reasons for us adopting SAP was, we recognized that there was a need for transformation, and SAP gave us, the opportunity to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. But you only brought in Celonis after go live, right? So
fundamentally, yes.
Transformation design.
So
Thank
I
you.
did mention earlier on, our experience with process mining was negligible prior to our SAP implementation.
Thank you. Jasper, a question for you, since this is something you do all the time. What did you learn that you would do differently with a different client?
Yeah, good question. I think being part last minute of such pressure cooker, as I can call it like that, was quite the different way of doing a project. I think you have to make peace with the fact that right after go live, again, the business doesn't have the headspace to adopt a new tool like Celonis. So therefore you have to be more prescriptive. So I think next time I would be anticipating on that and also setting up some sort of governance structure that would be, like, dear business, we can have a, like, say, office hour for 1 hour and during the week, and for the rest we'll send you updates via email, for example, where you are more proactive. I think it took us like 2 or 3 or 4 weeks to actually get into that mode. So next time I'll do that definitely quicker. And also I think that what I really learned was that simplicity sometimes is already like a big life changer. For example, what I showed, the level 1 migration analysis, where you just see how many users are performing which activities. Like, normally, if you have working established optimized processes, you want to go towards insights that are much deeper already. But right here, if you're again in the chaos of migrating to a new system, never used SAP before, then already looking at who is doing what and when and how is already quite interesting, quite valuable to then, for example, go into the billing block use case, right? So that's a good starting point, I believe, as well. And you can especially question everything you see because nothing is established yet.
Thank you. Kam, any last comments from you?
No, I think just on that specific point, I think it certainly would have been useful to engage earlier. I think Jasper nicely summed up our inability to sort of focus in this space with everything that was we had to contend with once we did go live. But I think we've been quite fortunate in working with a partner who's been super collaborative, but isn't afraid to sort of point things out to us because we don't know what we don't know. So in terms of sort of giving us insights, rather than saying, I need to look at this, also bringing to the table, you should be looking at this. Yeah.
Tremendous. Thank you both. Really a great conversation, great questions, great sharing. Appreciate your time and looking forward to more lessons learned. But thank you so much for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining in, and we'll share this with those who couldn't attend. Great, Patrick. Yes, bravo. Thank you, everybody. Have a fabulous day.
Thank you so much. And thanks for the opportunity, Kerry.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.